right now, I'm so excited for our next guest. I've been looking forward to this. Now, I never, Frank, got to see Warren Zevon live. Did you?
No, I never did.
Never got to see him live, but I had a very strange experience. I saw him at a Dylan show at the Wiltern Theater back in 2002 when Dylan first relaunched his career and stopped playing guitar and played keyboards all the time. He also was playing a lot of covers, and I went all 3 nights, and every night Bob Dylan played Warren Zevon covers. And on the last night, Warren Zevon was there. And Bob Dylan did something that he has never done before or since. He played 4 songs in his own set written by another artist. And when you're Bob Dylan with so many great songs, and you'll do 4 of another artist's songs in your set, Boom Boom Mancini, Mutineer, Lawyers, Guns and Money, and Accidentally Like a Martyr, you realize, wow, Warren Zevon's biggest fan is Bob Dylan and David Letterman and all the great artists who worship the man over the years. I never got to see him live, but I did see him at that show that night. And it was such a thrill. He was already quite sick by then. And Warren Zevon is, of course, a legend as a singer-songwriter, as someone who reinvented himself when his first stab at being a songwriter didn't quite work out. A lot of people don't know he was the Everly Brothers band leader for a while. He wrote songs for the Turtles, and it wasn't until he actually reinvented himself completely and embraced, some would say, his true self, which did involve drinking, that he finally became the guy that became so admired by some of the greatest artists of all time. And if you're a casual fan, you probably hear Werewolves of London, which just got relentless airplay. But this man was someone who grew deeper and deeper as a songwriter as he got older, who helped redefine the singer-songwriter dynamic. And now, I'm going to say this, the definitive biography has been released, drawing on interviews with Warren's friends and family. Our next guest has written a book that is so ingenious, both in terms of the quality of the writing, which is lovely, but also the device he used to tell Warren Zevon's story. Rather than a conventional biography, he takes 10 songs and extrapolates from these 10 songs what they were about, and through that gives a portrayal of the man, of the career, of the work, and of the legacy. James Campion is a syndicated columnist, journalist, and contributing editor to the Aquarian Weekly. He's already had several books, including Deep Tank Jersey, Trailing Jesus, Fear No Art, and, of course, Shouted Out Loud, the story of Kiss's Destroyer and the making of an American icon. The new book is so beautiful for the fan of Warren Zevon's humanity, as well as people who like Warren Zevon but want to learn why he's so revered by some of the most charismatic artists we have. The book is Accidentally Like a Martyr, The Tortured Art of Warren Zevon. What a pleasure to welcome James Campion to Sirius XM Insight.
I got nothing. I'll see you.
Thank you.
I can't follow.
First off, I want to thank you for being here because for 2 weeks I keep thinking whenever I see your name on the schedule, it's Jane Campion, and I have all these questions about the piano. And Holly Hunter was just here for The Incredibles. She said great things about you. This book is so moving, and I want to unpack your motivations to dive really deep. You know, the expression tortured artist is really overplayed, but Warren really embodied the pain and the joy of having this kind of hard-rocking, hard-drinking life. What was it that made you want to invest your talents into a biography of such an enigmatic figure who's so loved and yet so misunderstood?
Well, I just kind of looked around one day and I realized, first of all, thank you for having me, all you guys, and for those kind words, John. I looked around and realized that no one had really written a book about Warren. My good friend George Plaskides, who is a professor down in Auburn, did sort of an intellectual treatise on him, but it's kind of one of those things for academia. And his widow, his only wife, Crystal Zevon, who gave me tons of her time for this book, put out an oral biography after he died, which is, basically just interviews with people, which was fantastic too. But no one had really deconstructed these songs, had really celebrated the songs. And this guy's been kicking my butt since 1978 when I heard his Excitable Boy album for the first time, languishing in summer school. Some very smart urchin threw on the first side of that record, and from then on, I was hooked.
It's my favorite moment of the book, actually, is you telling the story of how being a teenager in '78 and hearing Excitable Boy, and how that unlocked something in you.
It sure did. Yeah, I wanted to be a writer when I was a kid. That, one of the things I always joke about is that, it's not really a joke, but sometimes you don't really know what the hell you want to do in life. But
what's that like?
I looked back at my 8th grade yearbook, and I had written writer on that. I don't know why I did, but I did. So about 5 years before I heard Excitable Boy, I wanted to put pen to paper. I wanted to tell stories, and I made some veiled attempts at that. But once I heard these songs, Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, Werewolves of London, Accidentally Like a Martyr, Lawyers, Guns, and Money, I was completely enthralled by the storytelling aspect of it. And then I find out later on in life that Warren, a lot of great writers that I loved came to Warren. Hunter S. Thompson.
Yes.
And Stephen King and Dave Barry and so many great writers. So it just makes sense. As a writer, you're sort of drawn to this storytelling aspect, the characters that he puts in the songs. And he said something very smart a few years before he passed. And that is, he said, how come I'm always getting, blowback for writing these terrible songs about murderers and rapists and the demi-monde, but how come you can make a film about anything? You could write a novel about anything, but with pop music, you have to be put in these different boxes. So that's really what drew me to him originally. And the subtitle, Tortured, it's funny, Backbeat Books, my publisher, The Fantastic, and Bernadette Malavacca, my editor, this is my second book working with her, she was a little put off by Tortured. But once I started to interview all the people around him, they all said, that's a subtitle? Perfect. And they gave different versions and different reasons why that was a really good subtitle.
Well, you really can't tell his story without doing a deep dive on alcoholism.
Correct. That's the, I call it the big blue whale in the room. Everybody uses the elephant in the room. But
was he...
that's the key.
Yeah.
Was he sober for a long time? Because one of my initial... just awareness of him was, I remember years ago reading this feature article about him in Rolling Stone magazine. This was like a long time ago, long before he got sick, and it was all about his sobriety and about how he had he wasn't drinking anymore, he wasn't taking drugs, and how it had ruined his life. But after that article, had he gone back, or had he stayed sober? Yeah,
it's a wonderful piece you're referencing there, the crack up and resurrection of
Warren
Zevon,
it's weird because I read so many
Nelson.
Rolling Stone articles, but that one, I always remember that article.
It's a brilliant piece. The long form of that is in Nelson's collected works, which came out about 5 years ago. It was about a 20,000 word piece. He spent a couple of years with Warren. Warren says the famous, "I don't want to die a coward's death" in it.
Right.
But no, he was George Gruhl, his aide de camp, and his hardy tour manager at the time, that said that when they were taking those photographs and the pieces were being written, that Warren had fallen off the wagon, which he did many times. In that wonderful piece, he describes the intervention that his friends and his family, Jackson Browne was there, Jimmy Wachtel, his wife, and several others. I was, the one thing I'm proud of is that I interviewed everybody who's alive that was in that room that day.
Oh,
it was very moving. But yes, he had many fallbacks. Finally, when he recorded Sentimental Hygiene in late 1986 with REM as a backing band, he was saved by Andy Slater, who would go on later on to manage the Wallflowers, and Fiona Apple ran Capitol Records for a spate there. Andy told me that, at that point he was sober and remained so until the last months of his life when he started to drink, and you can understand why.
Yeah, sure.
You can always tell how great a book is by how many pages I have dog-eared to reference during a conversation.
And I also remember that article, by the way. One quote of his has always stuck me. He said, they said you have to live one day at a time. I've actually been living 1 minute at a time.
I mean, in the 70s, Rolling Stone called his debut album one of the most significant releases of the 70s, and they placed him, they listed the 4 most important new artists to emerge in the decade, and Rolling Stone named those artists as Neil Young, Jackson Browne, Bruce Springsteen, and Warren Zevon. And it's interesting.
Not one woman. Wow, weird from Rolling Stone.
What's interesting to me was how his career began in the most unlikely of ways. Growing up in Chicago, and his dad was a Jewish immigrant from Russia who worked as a bookie. And it seems like a great childhood to set someone up to be a perpetual outsider.
Yeah.
Especially the fact that also, though, at the same time, he studied he got to visit and study Igor Stravinsky himself. I mean, it seems like he was such an iconoclastic figure because he was the product of so many very different influences.
No question about it. I dedicate a song that was never released that was discovered by his son, Jordan, and thank you, Jordan Zevon, for all his help with this book, allowing me to get access to the Zevon estate. I wanted to mention that here. But his son discovered this song called Studebaker, in which the car keeps breaking down, and I sort of use it as a metaphor, and I believe Warren was doing the same, for his relationship with his father. His father was a Jewish gangster, basically, who he told Waddy Wachtel, the great co-producer and guitar player, and Waddy told me this story that one day he said, I think my father killed someone, that kind of thing. And Waddy's like, geez, my father sold shoes, and his mother was a Mormon. So that's an incredible combination there, filled with Freudian traps.
A Mormon married to a Jewish gangster.
Yeah. It was a strange, and then you're right. I couple, and I don't mean to make this, I'm not trying to be, to not show the import to this. And I'm not being blithe when I say Warren's introduction to alcohol is his introduction to classical music, which is the two obsessions of his young life. He wanted to be a classical composer. And when he's 11, 12, he's discovered by someone who sees promise in him on piano, who sends him to Robert Kraft, who at that time was working with the 82-year-old Stravinsky.
He was Stravinsky's like second in command.
That's right. Yeah. And he took, and so Warren, as a 12-year-old, would spend afternoons sipping vodka with Stravinsky, two Russians hanging together, composers. And I believe that many times in his life, he always equated that feeling, that buzz, that taste of the vodka with the taste of the classical, with the sitting there and absorbing that music.
How Russian of him.
How Russian of him, indeed. Yes.
Wow. Now, I know that he quit high school, eventually moved from LA to New York to try to be a folk musician, like you do. And it seems like it took him having to really try to play at being a lot of different things before he discovered how to be Warren Zevon. I mean, I already mentioned he was a session musician. He wrote jingles, wrote songs for the Turtles. He had a song that he wrote on the Midnight Cowboy soundtrack.
That's right. He quit me. Yeah.
And of course, even being the band leader for the Everly Brothers, and then working with them individually when they split up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was mercurial. His career was mercurial. His personality was mercurial. His love life. One of the things I tried to do in the essays is I try to dedicate an essay not just to the song, but as you said beautifully at the top, it's a different way of kind of telling the story through his experiences. Because I feel that all artists have their own life experiences in the songs, and I've been interviewing rock stars and songwriters for years now, and that seems to be an underlying theme to all of them. So, I dedicate Poor Pitiful Me for his relationships to women, and not only sexual relationships, but his relationships to his wife and his first love, which is Jordan's mom, and to his daughter Ariel, who's a wonderful, strong woman, and gave me a great interview in the book. I dedicate something like Splendid Isolation into his idea of not wanting to be, or as Jordan says, love me, leave me alone. This kind of, I can't really connect to everybody, but I want to connect with everyone.
Yes.
I dedicate Desperados Under the Eaves to his alcoholism, his outsider status, as you mentioned. So each essay has a little bit more, I would hope, than the songs. They have a little bit of the man and explains a little bit about the different sides of how a person writes.
Which I love this as a device for a musical autobiography, to take 10 songs and each one reflecting a different side of his character, his artistry, his personality, his soul, his life. And from there, I mean, each song is a seed from which you spring forth all these narratives.
Was there, I was going to ask what led him from classical music into songwriting, and which also made me think to ask, were there formidable literary influences on him at the same time that there were musical influences on him? Because it seems like those two things converged eventually.
They absolutely do.
Songwriting.
That's an excellent question, and thanks for asking, because that again is why I come to Warren and other writers. Warren was inspired mostly, he said, by Norman Mailer. He was absolutely inspired by Dashiell Hammett.
Right.
And Raymond Chandler, the noir writers. We went with that look of the book. We wanted all the pictures to be in black and white. Beautiful photographs that were taken by Jordan's girlfriend, Suzanne. They're fantastic. And so he was very inspired by that. He was sort of anachronistic in the sense where he's a man from another time.
Right.
He saw the romance of the hard-bitten, hat-wearing, raincoat cinched up detective wandering his way through the alleys of L.A. He writes about the way Charles Bukowski writes about the bar scene in Los Angeles. And as my friend Adam Duritz, who I do a podcast with called Underwater Sunshine.
Adam Duritz of Counting Crows.
Counting Crows, yes, thank you very much. Who's on tour right now. Go see them. They're a fantastic band. But Adam said it very beautifully, and I put it in the book. He said, Warren captures the beautiful exhaustion of Los Angeles. Oh, no, not another beautiful day.
Yeah,
especially when you don't have any money and you've had a little bit too much to drink, and maybe
what's
you're
that like,
Frank?
One of my favorite quotes about Los Angeles, I don't know if it was Dorothy Parker's, it's a place where you can die from encouragement.
There you go. And I was going to say also, the classical to the rock and roll, through the folk, as John mentioned, that's just a natural progression of a songwriter. Warren said at a very early age he didn't want to sell dope or work at a car wash. Drive a taxi. He wanted to be in music. So if he wanted to do that, being a classical composer wasn't the way to do it. And, he liked the attention. When Werewolves of London hit, he never bristled by the fact that this sort of kitschy song made it. He always played it. He never backed away from it.
Yeah.
He embraced it. And I do want to say this before.
He was also a great showman and knew where to put the tentpole hits in a set.
He sure did. He was an excellent performer. Both of you guys said you didn't see him and you missed out.
I saw him on TV many times, but I never got to see a full show.
But I will say this. John mentioned the Dylan shows in 2002. I don't know if you got that far in the book, but when Warren was recording The Wind.
Yes, this is great. Tell the story.
Yeah, when he was dying, there was a point he decided he wanted to make this record with his friend Jorge Calderon, who also gave me much of his time for the book. And he can't get it together to finish the thing. He's just down. I mean, the man's dying, right? He's taking a phalanx of pills and he's drinking again, and his assistant Bridget Barr takes him to, and she told me this story, she takes him to a Dylan show. And throughout his life, he always said, Bob Dylan invented my job, quote unquote. And I use that throughout the essays.
That's a great quote.
It is, and it's true. And he revered Bob. And she took him to see Bob before. And Bob does not say much and said to him, I hope you enjoy what you hear tonight. And that night he played the 4 songs. And Warren, what Bridget said, was like a kid. He's jumping up and down. He's playing my songs. This is a 55-year-old man who's facing death.
I was in the audience watching him. I was watching Warren Zevon.
So you saw him.
Oh, yeah. Jeff Lynne was there, too, that night. It was the last night of the 3-night set, and it was crazy because it was when Dylan came back and was only playing keyboards and doing, like, the End of the Innocents and, he was doing Neil Young songs. He did Brown Sugar. And then the third night, he does 4 Warren Zevon songs, and Warren Zevon's in the room, and the crowd knew he was in the room, and the crowd knew that Warren was not doing well. He'd already released the album My Ride's Here, which is one of the best titles about impending death in the history of songwriting.
That's so great.
If you're just joining us, our guest is author James Campion. His new book is Accidentally Like a Martyr, The Tortured Art of Warren Zevon, and it's a great book for fans of Warren Zevon if you want to get into Warren Zevon, or if you're just looking for a book about what it is to be a singer-songwriter and the long tortured path to becoming a true original. And you talk about how Desperado's Under the Eaves is kind of a satire of the Eagles song Desperado, but it's also, and I never knew this, an homage to Bela Bartok. Yeah. In one of your conversations with his daughter Ariel, she says, and this is one of my favorite lines in the book, he was a musician through and through. This was his means of expressing his innermost, truest thoughts and feelings. And it seems like whatever was in his heart, be it pain or joy, Zevon knew how to turn it into beautiful art and make other people feel less alone through his own experience.
So well said. And that song's got my favorite couplet of anything he's done, my favorite stanza, and I always repeat it when I do these things. And it's, if California slides into the ocean, like the mystics and statistics say it will, I predict this motel will be standing until I pay my bill, which is funny, sad. And he also has this great song called Don't Let Us Get Sick, which is on the record before My Ride's Here. Life Will Kill You.
Life Will Kill You.
Which is another one.
Fantastic.
And it's Don't Let Us Get Sick, Don't Let Us Get Old, Don't Let Us Get Stupid. All right? I mean, I love, he combines these beautiful sentiments.
Yeah.
And then he gets you with the, don't let us get stupid, all right?
What was his, what was his relationship to his impending death? In other words, was it did it bring about great despair? Was he?
It brought about the best music of his life.
But I mean, just in terms of him knowing that the end was coming, did he have unusual courage in the face of it, or how would you attest that whole?
Yeah, he sure as hell did. I would say. I mean, he turned to his. I mean, the discussions I had with everybody he called when he found out he had inoperable lung cancer is just arresting, really. And when I heard Jorge tell the stories of how he got him through that record, but Warren wanted to, one of my favorite quotes in the book, guys, is what Crystal says towards the end. She's like, I realized once she finished the Wind, he let go of the artist. Because if you, in the beginning of the book, in the introduction, her quote is, if you want to know anything about Warren, you got to know about the songs. You got to know about the art. That's why I call it the tortured art of Warren Zevon. That really informed it for me. And so he let go of all of that when he finally finished the record, but he needed to do it. He was the artist first. He was the storyteller first. To go on to David Letterman and say something like, enjoy every sandwich, when David asks him, is there something that you can tell me that you didn't, that I don't know in the seat that you're sitting in? It's poetic, it's classic Warren, but it's also a man who was facing it with great strength and aplomb, as he always did everything, I think.
Now, he had mesothelioma, and I didn't know from the book that this is another case of a guy who just doesn't ever go to the doctor. Never goes to get checked up.
Yeah, for 20 years. Yeah, he said, if my dentist can't figure it out, I'm done. And he was right. It was
and
one
his
of those,
dentist made him see a doctor.
It was his dentist that told him to see the oncologist. That's correct. And
did he have the symptoms for a long time before?
No, he was in the best shape of his life. Yeah, it was fast.
He was actually he was working out.
He was. And on a personal note, while I was working on the essay for The Wind, my beloved mother-in-law, Mary Lou Moore, who was a great artist, passed away. And I dedicate the book to her. So, and it happened the same way. I mean, we're all hanging out on Memorial Day a couple of years ago, and she looked fine. She didn't look fine. I mean, but she was helping out and doing. And she drove all the way from Syracuse to New Jersey to be with us. And within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe, she was gone. And
he started feeling sick in 2002, and he died in 2003.
But he lasted as long as you possibly could. He lasted to see his grandsons born, Ariel's twins.
Yes.
Which was really cool. If you ever want to see a great piece of... Have you ever seen the VH1 documentary?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Inside Out, it was called Keep Me in Your Heart, after one of his great songs.
Great, great, beautiful song.
And it's a fantastic, in that way, as you can be, a study of a man dying, an artist dying, and doing and expressing that, letting us understand what it might be like to face it.
He's really an artist, and we mentioned Bob. I mean, REM loved him. We're his backup band. Sometimes I always recommend people listen to Hindu Love Gods, which Mike Mills was sitting here in that chair, and we talked about Hindu Love Gods.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, because that was the band he did with all the non-Michael Stipe members of REM. Yeah. And they have a great, and I mean great, cover of Prince's Raspberry Beret.
It is great.
And the David Letterman episode you mentioned was another rarity. Talk about Bob Dylan doing 4 songs of his in one night. Letterman had Warren Zevon as his only guest for an entire hour in late October of 2002. Letterman revered Warren Zevon.
Still does.
It still does. I mean, I know that Zevon used to be the musical director whenever Paul Schaefer couldn't join the band.
He did.
For like over a dozen years, he would fill in.
And he had Warren on when Warren was going through his tough times in the early 80s. And Warren always said, David Letterman was the best friend my music ever had. And Taylor Goldsmith from Dawes gave me an interview, and they do fantastic covers of Warren's songs. And Letterman wanted Warren to do Desperados Under the Eaves when he was there. But, what do you say to a dying... I mean, it was amazing. He was even coming to play songs. Warren was doing no press at the time. And if you watch the tapes of that on YouTube, he's shuffling his bones onto the piano stool and just getting through those songs, but doing it masterfully and with such strength and again, aplomb. I mean, there was never anything but style with Warren. And Dawes did a fantastic version of that. And Taylor said you could see Letterman losing it and just looking at the floor. And then recently, when he inducted Pearl Jam to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he stopped the speech and said, I want to be here next year, which didn't happen, to see Warren inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And that's one of the things I want to do with this book as well. Sort of a little crusade.
Still not. And he's never on the ballot either.
No, and that's my crusade.
That's fucked up.
I think it is, and thank you so much again, guys, for having me. This is a big deal for me to promote it at this level of media, because I really did want people to understand how great Warren Zevon was, how, as John mentioned earlier, revered he was by some of the big contemporaries of his time. Bruce Springsteen, when he was dying, when Warren was dying, Bruce Springsteen stopped his tour and cut off his Christmas vacation to come and record with Warren. They wrote a song together called Jeannie Needs a Shooter, which is
and it won a Grammy.
Big. And it won 3 Grammys.
That's right.
And it's great because...
Well, the Springsteen song won a Grammy, but the album won, I believe, 2 or 3.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, 1, 2. You're right. Very good.
Yeah.
The Springsteen one was Best Rock Duo Performance.
Group,
I don't know how they work those things out, but yes, thank you.
But The Wind is remarkable, too, because, it's sadly in the era when our rock heroes are leaving us that... Mm-hmm. The great final album by an artist who knows they're dying has become a whole new genre. And we talk a lot about Bowie, we talk a lot about Leonard Cohen, and The Wind. Aside from being
we had the guy Don Was who produced the Greg
Allman's
album,
final. He was here.
He knew he was dying.
Oh, that's right.
The Wind was also one of Zevon's most successful albums. It was certified gold right after he died, and the album won 2 Grammys: best contemporary folk, and then "Disorder in the House," the duet with Springsteen, was best group vocal. Right. Those awards were the first Grammys of his 30-plus career, and he didn't live to see it.
No. Did the Beatles win a Grammy?
Yeah.
They did?
Yeah.
But they won 1?
I'm not sure.
I'm just wondering.
Pepper won, and they won a few Grammys.
I don't know how they do that. I don't know how they figure this stuff out.
In the era when the
voters,
in the era when the Beatles were at their height, that's like when Andy Williams would win Grammys. You know what I mean?
That's
well, that's what
the Grammys have always been a demographical game of catch up.
Well, also, by the way, very good. By the way, I was going to say that Warren understood that he was not going to be a mainstream writer.
Right.
When you write songs like Frank and Jesse James, this sweeping folk song about 2 murderous racists, you know that you're going to be walking down different paths. When you write pastiches of the South, like Play It All Night Long, when you write songs about going to Detox Mansion on Last Breath Farm, you're not going to... these are brilliant songs,
and
but
there's so much humor in the pain.
Yeah,
that's what I just love about it. And there was that bitter, acidic, pointed humor that he would never just give into rage. He would always find a way to be Swiftian about it.
But I think instinctively, it's without him even trying, his most famous songs like Werewolves of London and Excitable Boy do kind of have hooks in them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And many, and I often, and one of the things I pointed out in the book is that many women, including Linda Ronstadt, famously recorded 4 of his songs and made a couple of them hits, did beautiful versions of them. Stevie Nicks did a wonderful version of Reconsider Me. So they seem to find the pathos in some of those songs. J.D. Souther, who was a lover.
He's a friend of the show, yeah.
Oh, yeah, he is? Okay, J.D.'s a great guy and gave me an interview. He was Linda's lover for a while, and she recorded quite a few of his songs. Always said that Linda could tell right away where the beauty was in his song. She pulled those things out. So, I personally love Warren's version of these songs. I love the baritone. I love how he uses fourths and not the usual stuff. He goes with those classical phrasings. I love the dark characters, but not everybody does. And he understood that wouldn't be a mainstream thing, and he'd be overlooked. He
was never going to be a verse, chorus, verse kind of pop writer. That said, he did work in that milieu. Working with the Everly Brothers, writing for the Turtles. And, Adam Sandler did a cover of Werewolves of London. He could have written pop songs if he chosen to go that way. It seems like he just had a deeper calling.
Right. And plus, he influenced so many people. Hotel California, which is just a long-form version of Desperados Under the Eaves, Don Henley and Glenn Frey sang on that song. A couple of months later, they're recording their version of using a hotel.
And who were his big non-classical influences, like from the world of rock?
Dylan. He liked blues. And then, of course, he was always impressed by his contemporaries. He loved Jackson.
And I also have to point out, and again, I could do this all day. I got to half my questions, James. But you do also highlight 3 albums that I think also are the seminal, if you're going to start a collection, you go with Excitable Boy to understand how this guy became really big, really fast. It didn't last long, but it was the hits that established the career. Sentimental Hygiene, which you refer to as the album that saved his life.
It's true.
And, it's
the best rock album he did, I think.
Yeah, and it seems like he could have done that whole arena tour. And then The Wind, which is just... and Sentimental Hygiene was R.E.M. as the backup band. And then The Wind, which is just an album about dying from a man who is dying and is not pretending he's not afraid and uncertain about all of it, but still finding the beauty in it. It's
true. And I still think the first record is my favorite. It really is. I dedicate 4 essays to it, so I thought I would break it up into those 3 albums.
What do you hope, to wrap it up, James, what do you hope readers take away from your book?
Just the brilliance of Warren, the difference, the uniqueness of his songwriting, what he did for the genre. He pulled it in a different direction the way Hemingway did with writing, the way Mailer did with the new journalism. The late Tom Wolfe had just passed. That's how I see with Warren with pop music. He took it in different directions. Maybe it wasn't as popular as his contemporaries, and it definitely wasn't. But I think the underlying theme of this book is that he's just a great, solid songwriter who understood his generation and understood the craft, and he should be celebrated wider. You made me want to go and listen to Zevon all weekend, and I did, and I thank you. And it's great to read a rock biography by a talented writer whose passion for the source material, as well as passion for the English language, it just comes through on every page. It's really a pleasure to meet you and to thank you to your face for writing this book. It's a lovely memorial, and I'm sure have the kids read it? Everybody's getting books now. Okay. And you don't shy away from the dark side. This is not a prettied up version of his life. Well, he didn't shy away from the dark side. No, exactly. But that's what I admire. It's a book that has the same integrity and fearlessness in studying its subject that Zevon himself had when he studied his beautiful, fucked up, imperfect life. Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much for being with us. Oh, no problem. James Campion is the author. What is the best way for folks to follow your work on social media? I'm on Twitter and Instagram, all the usuals. You can order a book from my jamescampion.com, my website. I will sign it and send it out to you free shipping if you live in the continental US. And that's James Campion again, not Jane Campion, because we had so many questions about Portrait of a Lady. Now I'm embarrassed. What a pleasure. Again, the book, and it's highly recommended for fans of Warren's work, is Accidentally Like a Martyr, The Tortured Art of Warren Zevon. I'm glad they let you use that title. Yeah, it's very appropriate. This is Sirius XM Insight. We'll be right back. Shadows are falling and I'm running out of breath. Keep me in your heart for a while. If I leave you, it doesn't mean I love you any less. Keep me in your heart for a while. When you get up in the morning and you see that crazy sun, keep me in your heart for a while. There's a train leaving nightly called when